Thanks for watching this episode of Adult Autism with William. I'm William O'Flaherty, and the following is from the 5th episode of the CHATTY AUTIES Show, where I'm the co-host. The topic is everyone a little autistic? Which is a subject I've covered before here, and you'll find a link in the description for that shorter episode. Today, I'm sharing the main content from the CHATTY AUTIES Show, and you can check out the nearly 40-minute episode on YouTube. There's a link in the description. Before we begin here, I want to draw a parallel that I did on that video. Again, it's only 8 minutes, so if you want a short version or if you want a nice summary, then after you finish watching this, you can go catch that. But a parallel between blindness and autism. That is, would it be fair to say everyone is a little blind? What do you think, Rebecca?
Well, I think this is a great comparison because it's true. Someone can have varying levels of blindness, as you're going to be explaining. And with any disability, we need to keep this in mind, right? Mm-hmm. Because if what we're doing is we're unintentionally downplaying someone's disability when we say something like this. And I know you're going to go into this explanation of blindness and how this fits. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Well, a person who is blind likely does have some degree of sight. It is not accurate to say that everyone is a little blind just because their vision is not 20/20. Now, some of my experiences from my first wife, she was legally blind, but she could still see. And so many individuals would not characterize. But of course, that gets into not having a obvious signs for a certain condition and such. But anyway, I did learn that the term legally blind refers to a specific level of visual impairment, and that a person is considered legally blind if the following two characteristics: their vision is 20/200 or less in their better eye, even with correction. In other words, glasses or contacts. And I actually vaguely remember back in high school, someone said that, I don't know, let's see how this fits here. My dyslexia is coming in, but without their glasses, their vision was greater than 20/200. But anyway, even with correction, it has to be so. But also their visual field, which is 20 degrees or less in their better seeing eye, which I'm not too familiar about what that all means per se, other than I guess it's the degree of range there. But either which way, the point is that even though this is not a perfect illustration, there is a legal definition in terms of whether a person is blind or not, and so there is a specific diagnosis that individuals can get, and there are some valid self-assessments which we'll note about here in a second. But yeah, so we're going to consider the DSM-5 TR criteria for adult autism, and no one should determine based on what we're sharing today whether they are autistic or not. You need to go to a qualifying professional to find out if they are. But having said that, not everyone is able to or might be able to afford getting an evaluation. So Rebecca, what has been your experience in this realm personally and or with those you've interacted with?
Yeah, that's great. So here's what I run into, and I hear this with a lot of other autistic people, is that the test itself is extremely expensive. And I think we mentioned that in the first episode, that people just simply cannot afford to get tested for this autism. So a lot of people are going and turning to other communities to see what types of traits that we identify with, right? Because I think I've also mentioned this at some point, and I say it all the time. It's not necessarily the diagnosis as much as the experience that you're experiencing, right? Because you could have traits very similar to autism, but it could be something else. Yet you still need support. You still need to be valued and seen as somebody who's struggling. And I think even in my situation with chronic PTSD, and having to navigate that, but also recognize that I have a lot of neurodivergent traits. And I guess now, because again, we talked about this in I think episode 2 or 3 about how Asperger's turned to autism spectrum disorder with levels. I would have been probably like a level 1 if I was actually officially diagnosed. So many people are choosing self-diagnosis based on their experiences. And I think that that's just as valid. I really do. Because regardless of what the medical professional field may say, there is a need to listen to the person, right, that is going to them, right? Listen to them, listen to their experiences, listen to the struggles that they're having and their experiences with autistic traits. Because even if you may not say this person is diagnosed autistic, right, they may be experiencing things that are enough to fit in with the autistic community. And I think that's important to note.
Very good points. Now, a common trait in terms of what is associated with autistic individuals is to have some degree of social challenges. However, just because a person is socially awkward or maybe even overly friendly, this doesn't mean that they are automatically on the spectrum, which of course is another term used to say that someone is autistic. So then social differences or difficulties is the first of two major criteria that an individual must have to possibly be diagnosed autistic. In fact, in the social differences category, there are actually three subsections that must be true as part of a qualifying diagnosis of autism. Now, unfortunately, the wording in the official language is more negative. That is, it uses deficits instead of differences. That's another topic altogether. But for now, I want to acknowledge that and note that I will sometimes use the more negative language, even though I believe it is better to use a more neutral wording for that. Rebecca, what have you heard from others about this, the use of negative terminology used to describe autistic characteristics?
The wording and the way that people will say, oh, that person isn't using eye contact, that person, seems to be a little socially awkward, right? When we're pointing those facts out, all right, they may be facts, but when we're pointing them out in that way, it can be very personally hurtful, right? It can be discouraging for someone to hear it. It's not like we walk around going, oh, that person wears funny hats. Haha.
Oh,
I like your hat. I think your hat's wonderful. But like if someone had that thought, right? And they said, "Oh, I don't like that hat. That's funny looking." Well, to just come out and say it like that, it doesn't help connect with the autistic community, right? And when to say something like what we're talking about, well, everyone's a little autistic, right? It's a downplaying of that person's characteristics and their traits and the way that God made them special, right?
mm-hmm. Well, so then, as mentioned, there are three subcategories, and this is from the DSM-5-TR, and they are that a person has, and I'm going to use the more negative language this time, deficits in 1, social emotional reciprocity, 2, nonverbal communicative behaviors, and then 3, developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So again, a person must have differences or difficulties difficulties or differences, deficits is in the official language in each of these three areas to meet the first of two major criteria for an autism diagnosis. Thus, just because a person doesn't make eye contact or lacks facial expression, as just a couple of examples from this second category, this doesn't mean a person is a little autistic. It merely means that they have characteristics that are part of the criteria to be diagnosed autistic. Then if you know someone, and who doesn't, who is always interrupting conversation and doesn't seem to get the back and forth nature of conversation, this doesn't mean automatically that person is autistic. This individual merely has one characteristic from the first major category that would be considered consistent with a person diagnosed as autistic. Then in the third category, a person isn't automatically or isn't a little autistic if they have trouble making friends or maintaining friendships. Unless, of course, they have that difficulty and they also meet the other two criteria in addition to ones that we haven't yet mentioned.
This is really helpful because you're speaking also as a family counselor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you met a lot of autistic people in your practice?
Well, it wasn't a population that we commonly work with because in terms of
Mhm.
we would see, or that is what we're not going to get into in a major way is those that need more supports level 2 or 3 would need other services. And
Right.
so, but in the last 3 years, definitely, we've had more families that have kids that are diagnosed autistic.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, one of the things I want to make a point of is it's easy to see level 2s and 3s. It's easier, I should say, to see levels 2 and 3 in someone visually. But that level 1, that
Hmm.
Asperger's side, that is a lot harder to identify, right? And I think that's where we get a lot more of the everybody, is a little autistic
Hmm.
because people may recognize traits in an autistic level 1 person, and then they might identify with some of those traits. Like you said, they could have 1 or 2 and be like, oh, well, I do that. I do that too. So then I must have a little autism in me too. Not necessarily like what you're pointing out here. Um, Trouble making friends, maintaining friendships, things like that can also be just your social upbringing. There's a lot of people who have come from sheltered places. I grew up in a very sheltered home. Some of my social interactions were from that, but something I noticed that was different with me in my personal story is I isolated a lot. I spent a lot more time alone because I had a hard time understanding what people were talking to me about. And that was the hardest part because I thought I understood, but they did not. And I always felt like I was in this other world, on this other planet. And I used to say, I think I'm from another planet before I knew Jesus.
Hmm.
I thought I came and was, crash landed here somehow. And many autistic people have that experience, right? So the difference, I think, with me was I didn't pick up on the social cues except for in masking. I was imitating, copying what other people were doing. So then when I was out on my own having to figure out friendships and relationships, I was always the weird, awkward one. Immediately I became the awkward one. Well, because I had a hard time with social cues and social anything. So yeah, people just got to know me that way.
Hmm.
But
Oh yeah, I can definitely, I can definitely relate. But yeah, so we were talking about the different criterion, and that the next major one is the restrictive or repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities, and there are actually 4 subcategories in this. However, a person only has to meet 2 of the 4 for an autism diagnosis. So that is in addition to meeting the other criteria that we previously mentioned. Now, and so if you consider this, that's why there's an expression that I forget who actually said it, but it basically says that when you've met one person who's autistic, you've only met one person. Or I could creatively maybe say it slightly different, that no 2 autistic people are alike, which I'm sure other people have said. But anyway, again, in the official language, this is described as restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities, and then the text notes that it must be manifest by at least 2 of the following, which is what we were just saying. So again, it's 2 of the following. So the first subcategory is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. Now, one example could be lining things up. For children, it might be toys. For adults, it might be action figures. Now, I know what you're thinking, Rebecca, and the rest of the audience. Like, aren't action figures the same things as toys? Well, that is a rabbit hole for a future a story.
yeah.
So for the sake of time, we're going to kind of bypass that
Okay,
conversation.
sounds good.
So, people can, though, leave their comments in the comments section about that. But my point is that a person who lines things up, it doesn't mean they're simply a little autistic. Now, it could be a sign to consider whether or not that person might be autistic, and they might need to be evaluated. But again, you have to meet several criteria to qualify for a diagnosis. Then the second subcategory is insistence on sameness, inflexible, adherence to routines, or ritualistic patterns, or verbal or nonverbal, or of verbal or nonverbal behavior. So if your uncle Steve or niece Alicia, and I don't have any relatives of those names, gets highly upset if you change their plans, or if they tend to eat the same food every day, then it doesn't mean automatically that, say it with me, that they're little autistic. So, yeah. So, well, have you come across a few people that don't like a change in routine or eat the same foods? I mean, we just did our popcorn one. When you're talking about like sprinkling different taste, or it's like it's not sounding good. When I go to a buffet, I first eat as much as I want of the stuff I know I like, and then I'm full and I don't try anything new.
Well, that's an example of how different people can be on the spectrum. Some people would actually be loving trying all of them because that's an interest that they have, right? And then some people are like, no, I want it as simple as possible, as bland as possible, right? And I would say bland as in it doesn't have much flavor, like no seasoning, no nothing. I know people on both sides of the spectrum that have interests both directions. So I would say, like with this one, actually, can you ask that question again because I just forgot it already.
Well, it was about food, and people
started thinking about popcorn.
to just eat the same food, but we probably could just move on from there. All right, well, so let's go ahead and continue by first recapping to remember that there are, again, 4 subcategories in this section. That I've already mentioned 2, and a person only has to meet 2 of the 4 for an autism diagnosis. That is, if they also meet the other qualifying criteria mentioned before, which you had to meet all 3 of those. So anyway, the subcategory number 3 is highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal or intense, that are abnormal in intensity or focus. So, common examples are the stereotypical fixation of trains or dinosaurs. That automatically means a person is autistic. But only having a very narrow or intense interest in something doesn't make a person autistic. Otherwise, everyone who had a specialized, job would be considered autistic, and that's definitely not the case. Then finally, the 4th subcategory is hyper or hyposensitivity to sensory input or unusual intensity or interest in sensory aspects of the environment. So this is obviously known as the sensory issues category. In fact, I've wrongly mentioned to other people that this was, if someone is autistic, that's going to be a telltale sign. But as we see here, that it is one of 4 in this category. And that they don't have to have an issue within this realm. But anyway, so a person with issues in this area, it could mean that they will be over or under reactive in the sensory realm, or they could be obsessively interested in certain smells or touching certain objects. That would lend itself to something similar to OCD. But again, these are just a few examples. And as before, just because someone has problems or is different in this area, it doesn't automatically mean that the individual is autistic or that they're a little autistic, which we're saying is not helpful. But, actually to sum up, again, for this is someone needs to have differences or deficits in all 3 of the first major criterion, which we talked about, I referenced it a moment ago, and then just 2 of the 4 that we just discussed.
Well, this is really helpful, even to me. Probably some of the best explanation and of all of this. And honestly, I would encourage you to, because this is such a heavy topic and it had a lot of information, play it back, rewind it, rewatch it, re-listen to it, and take notes, because this is something so valuable that you're sharing, William. For all of the people out there who may have had other reasons why they're having autistic traits, right? It could be environment, it could be the food that we're eating, the toxins that are going into our body that shouldn't be there. I mean, there's so many reasons why someone might be struggling in some area. And there's a word too that I will not mention, because if I do, I could get striked from YouTube on a reason why. But yeah, so it's something that I think it's so important to gather information. We are not coming here saying that this is exactly every single thing we say is what you should follow, but for yourself, do your research. We always, encourage that too. Do your own research, check into these things, look it up, look at what other professionals are saying in this area of how they're diagnosing autism, because we don't want to diagnose ourselves with something that we actually don't have. This is why I say that when someone asks me, "Are you autistic?" I say, well, when things merged, when the Asperger's, which was, that high functioning side of things, merged with autism, well, obviously I'm not a level 2 or level 3, right? And you're not a level 2 or level 3. I can see that, right? So there's something about us that's a little different than your level 2 and level 3, more advanced autism. So what I like to answer is I say I have a lot of traits that are similar to the autism spectrum. I tend to claim more the neurodivergent side, which means that my brain is diverging and processing differently. And I can get behind that, partly because I am diagnosed with chronic PTSD. I have a lot of sensory struggles with certain areas. It can be a sound, it can be a social. My nervous system activates that way, right? And I'm a multi-creative. I mean, I am multi-gifted in so many different areas, and that's a blessing, right? There's many of us in this community that can do so many different things, and while we get kind of pigeonholed into, well, just pick one, it is very difficult for us to do that naturally, right? So even just those traits alone helps me fall into that neurodivergent category. Could I get evaluated and be found to be autistic on that level 1? Possibly, right? Maybe one day I'll be able to, and then I'll have more answers. But if you aren't able to, don't beat yourself up, right? We really want you to know that you're loved and cared for just as you are, and you have those experiences, and they're valuable to us and to other people who are really paying attention to the autistic community in the professional field. And we encourage all professionals to really listen to this and take something from this so that you can be even better for your clients. Was there anything else here that you wanted to give in conclusion?
Yes, yeah, I did want to wrap up by acknowledging, though, even though I was going through the DSM-5 TR, that there were actually 3 more criteria that I won't be mentioning now, because you can, look it up, and it's not all that lengthy, but in terms of processing it or understanding it, I remember before I was diagnosed that I looked at it and I misunderstood what it was actually saying without some elaboration. So in the actual criteria, it's brief and concise, but it can be not clearly understood. And so we're not going to go into that. And then any links that we're able to give, we can give you a link to be able to read that yourself. But because the main theme here is that everyone is not a little autistic. So we went about it by looking at the different characteristics and going through kind of all the different possibilities. So, and then even though we've already referenced level 1, level 2, and level 3, that in addition to when a person is diagnosed autistic, then there is that support needs is what's tended to spoken of now. And then this is accurate as of 2025. I don't know, we could say at any moment, but I think we'll have some warning or be aware of that, like when a DSM-6 is out, but they could change this and not have these different levels and come up with another term, because on our other show we talked about how using the term Asperger's is probably not the best because of the association. But if level 1s want to have something to kind of be able to more easily be note in terms of what their support needs are, because it's different, that most people can think about a level 2 or 3 person as a stereotypical autistic. For clarification, then another term might be set out. But anyway, as of 2025, this is when this is accurate. And so I hope everyone has found that useful. As was noted, you might want to go back through this episode, or I did a 8-minute version of this with just me sharing about it that you might find helpful as well. I hope you enjoyed this material from the Chatty Auties Show. As mentioned before, you can get the full episode on its own YouTube channel, and the link is in the description. I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos.